the delay. We've had a few technical issues with us all joining today. But yeah, I don't want to take much longer from this because we've got some exciting coming up with Piradeesh Menon, who's joining us from Ireland, Dublin. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us on our Tools and Techniques Thursday session today. Very excited for us to be able to do this in collaboration with the IIBA Ireland chapter. So yeah, thank you for having us and joining us and allowing us to collaborate with the IIBA Ireland chapter. But yeah, I think tonight's session is going to be a great one. Piradeesh has some interesting things up his sleeve, and it's all going to be very interesting, something we're all looking forward to, and negotiating needs, and like the title said, probably the most underrated skill. So yeah, we'd just like to thank you all from wherever you're joining today. And I'm just going to hand over very quickly to Sips, who's just going to take you through just some rules or house rules for the session today. And then we will get into the session because we are a little bit behind on time. So I don't want to take any more of your time, but a warm welcome to everybody and thank you for joining us today.
Greetings to everyone. My name is Sipo Melele from the IIBA Durban chapter. Thanks again for attending our webinar. I would like to quickly go over the rules and other bits before we begin our webinar. Please stay on mute unless cleared to talk. Switch off your video. Only the presenter's video is allowed. The presentation will be 50 minutes long. You may post your question in the main chat. We'll read them to the presenter when it's time for questions and answers. Presentation will be uploaded on the IIBA SA YouTube page found on this link. Unfortunately, we do not send out the presentation deck. If you like also to present a tool or techniques to the community, please contact on durban@southafrica.iiba.org. To become a member of the IIBA South Africa, please click on this link.
Great. Thank you, Sips. And I think, yeah, without further ado, I don't know, Lara, if anyone from the Ireland chapter wanted to say hi or introduce themselves, or are we going to be handing over to Piradeesh?
We do have a board member who might want to say a few words.
Okay, so very quickly, because we're a little bit behind schedule. Hello, everyone. My name is João. I'm, as mentioned, I'm with the IBA Ireland chapter. I'm here to support the South African chapter and also to to celebrate this great partnership and this great collaboration we're having between our two chapters. And hopefully this will be the first of many collaborations between the two chapters. That's it for me. Thank you. Enjoy.
Thank you so much. And everybody over to Piradeesh. Thanks, Piradeesh.
Okay, all right. So let me just get started. You should be hearing me now. I'm going to start my screen share. That should come up in a minute. Okay, just let me know once you see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right. So thank you, Ruth, and thank you, everybody. And apologies for the delay. So the more and more we get used to technology, technology just throws you off and says, hey, listen to me and get ready to learn. So be it. All right. That being said, a warm welcome to everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Today, I just want to walk you through about one of the skills which I feel is most underrated and something which a tool or technology cannot teach you. It's about a skill of negotiating and particularly negotiating needs. So as a business analyst, most of you would agree that every day we imbibe as well as we breathe, we eat, talk, needs, right? I mean, whatever is needed by the customer is something which we kind of think and we churn it out as a feature. So basically that's what we do. But what we forget to do is negotiate these needs, because as a customer, even if you put yourself as a customer, what happens is that you expect everything to be perfect. But if you look at things and if you take a step back, nothing started perfectly, right? I mean, everything started with a bit of imperfection, and iteration by iteration, you kind of improve things. So whenever we develop something, that's also something which is missing, is what I believe. So today we're going to target this skill, which is very underrated, as well as not many of us think of it whenever we talk about features. So I want to touch this. Before I do that, just a bit of information which I would like to start with. Couple of topics over here are a bit interactive per se. So whenever you see a question, or whenever I ask a question, maybe you can either put your hands up, or you can just type down the answers, and then I can see it from there and we can proceed. So having said that, I have your first question. I mean, technically, there is a definition for a product or a service, because most of us who work as business analysts either cater to a product so that we develop new features for the product, or we provide a service to a customer, a company, or an institution, such that they progress. So it can be a feature for a product, a process for a service, and so on and so forth. So when you reflect on your day-to-day life, you might always have a definition for a product. I mean, not the literal textbook definition of a product or a service, but you will have a practical day-to-day definition of a product or a service. So I would like to hear from you what a product means for you, or the moment I say the word product, what it means to you. So we could understand the kind of impact this word has on each of us as a business analyst. So let me hear what you feel is the definition of a product or a service. Okay, I'm going to check if I can see what's been written. Okay, so fair enough. Let me just go ahead and provide you a definition of a product or a service from the literal term. The literal term of product or service depends upon what you are trying to develop. For an entrepreneur, a product is something by which he is satisfying a need, or he is providing a feature where he can provide something new to the end customer. So it can be something which is satisfying a need, or a need which a customer per se did not even think about, right? So that's a definition of a product on a day-to-day basis. And if you look at a service is something which improves your day-to-day life, or it adds value to what you're doing. So that's basically my definition. I would have loved to hear what you had as a definition for a product or service. Maybe I can wait. You can think about it and get back to me over the session. We would have a couple of minutes for the Q&A, so you can get back to me regarding that. Now, going to the needs. When I talk about needs from Agile or Scrum methodology, you would all understand and maybe relate that there are different types of needs, be it blockers, something which are showstoppers, or something which you must develop such that a business or a customer can proceed. Then you have the must needs, which actually are second in priority. So you give must or the most priority to the blockers, then you give for the must, then you talk about the shoulds. So this is about the needs which we know per se, right? I mean, does anybody over here fear or feel that there is some type of needs which are missing here? Okay, so let me just put it in a different perspective for you. When you look at a customer, be it an end customer, a person who's using a product, maybe a person who's using an iPhone. So if you look at them, you will have to provide something by which the company can survive, it can compete and outclass, right? So if you take Nokia as a company, it developed products to survive. But when it came to competition, it wasn't able to survive the competition. Then you had something or the products from Apple, which were actually able to outclass the competition. Now, where did this companies go wrong? I mean, you have multitude of companies, right? You had Nokia, which was doing very good business when it comes to the Symbian operating system per se, but when it came to something where it was a smartphone as such, they were not able to survive. So where did they go wrong, or what happened over here? The problem here was that they weren't able to understand exactly the transition of needs, and this eventually impacted the survival of the organization per se. As a business analyst, do you think that something could have been done over here? If you take a back step, I would say definitely. I mean, if you look at a product like a phone from Nokia, it was built to last, right? I mean, that was their key usability point. I mean, the phone was a brick, it could outlast almost everything. But as it aged, as newer phones came in, the needs were to upgrade in technology, to update the product per se, but they still had this notion that they should have a durable device which can outlast ages. But that wasn't the trend or the need of the time, and they were not able to compete when it came to products like Androids as well as the iPhones, and they were not able to survive, right? But if you look at a product like an iPhone, they were able to outclass. And do you need an explanation on how or why iPhones were able to outclass others? It was because they targeted something which people were not thinking at that time. I mean, you had a product which could do the actions of a computer per se. It can take photographs, and it could work seamlessly without getting any issues which an Android phone can. At a point when you are talking about the early 20th century or the early 2000s, having this kind of a feature with a robust technology was something which was great. And this was something which the customer never stated as a need, but this was something a maestro called Steve Jobs was able to identify, right? Now, as I said, when the first iPhone came in, or when the first iteration of the iPhones came in, not everything were perfect, and you did not have a device which excelled in all these segments, but they still went ahead because that was able to compete and at times outclass because certain features were not available in the other phones, right? So just giving you a perspective of how and what kind of an impact this basically has when it comes to competing on the grounds. Now, moving on to organizational needs, because not everybody over here as participants, as well as folks in general, get a chance to work on a company which is more into entrepreneurship or into developing products which actually make impact. Few of us also work in organizations which develop mass products, which also provide services. So if you look, most of us might work in a segment where we kind of handle the software side of a different product. We might develop financial solutions, we might develop healthcare related solutions, and stuff like that, right? Now, when you take a step back, or at least if I can take my case, during the early days of my career, I never thought what is my organization's goal or needs. How is my product or my feature going to impact the organizational needs, right? Now, this sometimes becomes really essential when you're kind of looking at the amount of money which goes in to developing a feature, right? So if you take an organization, there is different standards by which they play. Initially, when you look at an organization, it has to maintain a certain level. So if you take Apple as an organization or Tesla as an organization, it has to maintain a certain standard when it comes to the technology and the level of innovation which it brings up, because they already have a benchmark set. Now, it doesn't stop there. You cannot just have an inspirational technology or an inspirational product and just survive. You need to make sure that via iterations, you achieve a perfect product. So this is something which you might have noticed. I mean, most of us follow news, and you would understand that Tesla initially launched an electric car, which was good. It did have its own pros and cons, but it did iterate. There were certain issues, there were certain problems. They did look into it, but at certain point in Tesla's life cycle, it had a big bottleneck, as in they were not able to keep up with the promise of delivering their products within the time frame which was provided. And had they not been able to achieve the targets which they set for themselves, that would have had a big impact, big negative impact rather, on the organization, and it could have impacted the growth of the organization, its innovative culture, the impact it has on its competition, and so on and so forth. But that's another point, right? In order for you to maintain an organization and help it achieve, you need to develop products, features which can survive, right? I mean, this also boils down when it comes to the complexity with which we work. So you might have a release or a pre-AD cycle where you're developing a complex product. Now, if you're sure that your product cannot survive and achieve a certain goal, then it's pretty clear that you need to kind of understand or scale down and see how best it can iterate. So for a customer, if you look at a point, a product is always a fully rounded 100% product, right? I mean, it has to be the perfect product. But for us business analysts, that doesn't have to be the case. I mean, for us, products or services are supposed to solve problems and help move on. I mean, it shouldn't be a bottleneck. It shouldn't just prevent them from, it should just be something which doesn't prevent them from progressing. So the moment you have or you achieve 70 to 80% of the end goal, that's more time for you to take a back step, understand, see how the product is evolving, and then move ahead. So rather than getting 100% of requirements and then seeing what needs to be done, the iterative way is the way which should happen. So basically, when it comes to negotiating, this is where it becomes very important, right? I mean, you never ever write the user stories or the business requirement for the entire 100% or the entire foolproof product or feature, right? The moment 80% of the feature is done, mostly what happens is the usage of your clients, it goes different. Or what happens is that the additional 20% need just becomes obsolete. So that is also something which you need to kind of understand. I'll give you examples about these points which I'm talking about as we go ahead, because we will deep dive and look into a couple of products which actually did this pretty well. But just for you to understand what I mean by maintain, achieve. Excel is totally a different story, right? If you look at a product, if you can point out to a day-to-day customer or an organization as a customer that you can provide a service which they did not even think about. Now, that by itself is a product or a service which excels. Nobody thought in their wildest dream that they could travel to space as a tourist. right? A company made this possible, and until it invited people to join them to travel to space, no normal human thought that that was possible as a service. But yet we are here at a time where people can travel to space, right? So these are certain points which help organization excel. Now we're talking about big things, right? I mean, let's get to the minuter level. How do we business analysts bring in this kind of impact onto the product is something really important for us to know. I think this is the holy triangle, which I call, or the product triangle. I think most of us would be knowing this, but just to kind of walk you through this, this is where you kind of have your cost, time, and scope meeting, and where we deliver the quality. And as you might know, if there is any change in one of the element which is part of the triangle, the other two becomes hit as such. So if your scope increases, your cost and time to deliver the product also increases. So if you want to get a product or a feature early, you need to either reduce the scope or your cost if you want to keep the same time, and henceforth. So if you want to keep two of the variables constant, you need to reduce one, or if you want to keep increase one of the element over here, then you need to increase the other two. So that's basically how this works. And all three has to be maintained in a very good balance in order for us to provide a quality product. So let me just take it into our normal working cycles, and let's try to analyze how we can add value when it comes to negotiating the needs, right? So when you look at a product or an application or a service which you're providing, what happens is that from a product management side, you get the entire list of features placed down from a release cycle to release cycle basis. And within the release cycles, you get this information placed for priorities, right? Now, what happens is that business would want the feature working seamlessly in a full end circle by the time they start using it. But do you deliver a product 100% would be the question. So let's say you have 3 features to develop in 3 releases. How do you take this forward is a question. I mean, the ideal expectation from any customer would be that release 1, you work entirely on one feature. Release 2, you work on the second feature. Release 3, you work on the third feature. By end of the third release, you have 3 features which are fully fledged and customers happy. And thankfully, most prudent product management professionals don't take this approach. And this is also where we kind of fall into place, and we kind of help them and make sure we kind of developed all these 3 features, or we initiate developing these 3 features right from the first release. The reason being, after the first release, if you give them 25 to 30% of the product to work with, they start using it. Either your scope decreases because you already know, once you have proper hands-on, that certain features are not anymore needed, because until then it was all guesstimation and people speculating. Or what happens is the scope increases, which means you have a cushion of 2 more releases to decide what needs to be done and what not needs to be done. And ideally, most of you might agree over here, is that in order for business to prosper or customers to proceed without getting blocked, you don't need 100% of a product. Trust me on this. You don't need 100% of a product for a customer to be happy or customer to carry ahead with his day-to-day life. I mean, I use an iPhone. I'm not happy with the battery, but I still use iPhone. You might have similar examples for yourself on a daily life. It's just because we expect or we believe that a product has to be 100%, people might stick on and try to improve all the features per se, but definitely most of the successful products in the world, most of the services in the world are not perfect. They're just good at 60% of what they do, and they are average at 40% of what they do. Now, where our impact comes is understanding what is the 60% and what is the 40%. How do you do it is the question, right? Be it a product, be it a service, how do you understand what is the 60% and what is the 40%? Ideally, it depends on how good your homework is from a business analysis standpoint is. So this is where you kind of map back to understanding what your customer need is, right? So when you're developing a product and you already know who are going to use it, you need to understand what you are going to segregate your needs into. I mean, what are the survival needs over here from a feature perspective? What are the needs which will compete and generate revenue or add visibility to your product is something which you understand. And you should also understand what are the features which will outclass, as in which will add a wow factor to your customers, which will impress them per se. And it will also help other competitors take a look and understand that, okay, we have a product which is pretty good with features which are pretty better than what we do. Now, there has to be a good distribution when it comes to the numbers when you're developing something, and you need to segregate your needs based on this. I mean, it depends on how aggressive the organization is. Depending upon the aggressiveness of an organization, you might have 20% of features which are on bare survival mode. So you would provide 20% of features which are basically needed for the customer. If it's a calculator, if I take that as an example for you to map what I'm trying to tell over here, if I'm taking a calculator, I might just have the basic BODMAS functionalities of your addition, multiplication, division, and so on and so forth as the survival needs. 20% would be put into that. And if I'm developing a product which is pretty aggressive, that is. When it comes to competing needs, the most complicated or the most sophisticated calculators right now handles algorithms and stuff. As such, the scientific calculators or the calculators which use AI to process information. So that is something where you would put a number which is equal to 40% or per se, and 20% is where you kind of want a feature to outclass. Now, if you're developing something which is pretty aggressive, and if you're trying to compete in a market where you need to make an impact, so calculator is a product which has been there for ages, right? I mean, you cannot just launch a normal calculator and expect it to be a success, right? If you need to kind of develop and deploy a product which kind of has an impact, then you need to have an impact on how the needs are arranged and deployed as an end product. And this is where you need to kind of segregate yourself and convince business. So that's one of the most important thing, because when needs come in, it doesn't come in this perspective of whether the need is very basic, whether the need is something which will enhance their capability, or whether that need is something which they thought of and no product provides. It just comes in as needs which they say, hey, currently this is a legacy product and this is what the product does. Your product, when you develop it, it must do it. That's your survival detail. And then you would have somebody who's actually transitioning from a different product onto your new application. They would say, hey, this is a competing product. We were using it until now, and now we are being asked to use your product. The other product is really good at doing all these things. So I expect at least this to do it. That's your survival then again. But if you need to provide a step more than what it already provides, that's where comes the competing segment. Outclass is basically something which your product provides, which the legacy or the competing product does not provide. And how you pack this in a release is also something. It depends on the kind of organization which you work. If you're working or if you're shadowing as a product management professional, then you have the control where you can kind of decide whether this fits into a release or not. But If not, what would happen is that you kind of need to convince business that, hey, I understand that we have 3 releases. We're going to give products and or features in such a way, but this is how it should come to you so that you kind of get this tested and you kind of move it ahead. And the reasons will always help, because if you're able to give a feature which is not there when it comes to a legacy application or a competing application in the first release, and it kind of works. I mean, when you're developing something or when you're trying to innovate, it either comes out good or it just backfires, right? Whatever be it, you would need some time to kind of optimize or work on it and make it better. And if you are able to provide this to business on the first release or the first um, iteration of the product right after your prototype, and if they can give you real-time feedback, by the time you already have a matured product, what happens is that your feature, which is supposed to help you outclass, would have matured better, which makes you a stronger competitor when it comes to market. So that's how it impacts your customer needs. When it comes to the organizational needs, this also has an impact, and this is where you can negotiate without having this influence. Let's all be honest here. I mean, after a certain point, you need to be able to influence without authority, right? I mean, you can kind of put your foot down and say that, hey, this is what is needed. This is what business wants. Please develop or test it like this. There you can put down your foot and say, this is how it is. Anything beyond that, be it the customers, be it the product management professionals, be it the regulatory authorities, you cannot influence with authority. Your influence comes without authority. And here, if you need to influence, you either need a strong concept or strong data to say that this is what is needed to be done. Now, if you're developing a product and you're going to aggressively market it, or you're going to provide features in a way that it is going to make a big amount of visibility, then it has to match the organizational needs, or it needs to at least do better than what the organizational needs are, right? Take a point. This is where I kind of like the company Apple, right? I mean, Apple was a struggling company. It was doing a multitude of things at a point when Steve Jobs came in. It was working on more than 20 other projects. And finally, they just trimmed it down to a couple of projects, and they kind of looked into it and they developed 1 or 2 products which actually were game changers. Now, here we're talking about a CEO talking to the board of directors and being able to influence, right? I mean, irrespective of whether it's a CEO or a business analyst trying to make his point, when it comes to influencing without authority, what you need to do is that you need to make sure that you align with the organizational needs so that you can go ahead. This can work both ways, right? I mean, you can get a node when it comes from an organizational perspective, or you can also influence the customer, right? You might have a customer who really wants a feature, but if it is not within the organizational goals, or if it isn't within the organizational needs, then you could use this to influence the customer, right? I mean, let's take the current trend, right? We are all looking out and thinking whether there is a recession which is looming. Now, if you're developing a product and the customer wants one specific feature which might not add a lot of value, you could always try to convince the customer with your data. And right now, most organizations are into kind of a mode where they want to wait and watch and not put in a lot of investment into new kind of technologies or products. Now, this is something which you can use to influence your customer. Hey, right now we have a feeling that this feature or service might not add value or add monetary value per se. Looking at the condition and looking at where the organization is thinking, I would really want you to rethink whether we should go ahead with this. I mean, you're just planting the seed and you're just waiting for it. And that's also something which we should do, right? I mean, it's not that we kind of push for it and push for it until it happens. We kind of have this flimsy line where we stand, because after a certain point, it's going to be a decision beyond you. In case the decision is not in favor of you, what can happen is that you still deliver it. And if you are right, this is something which you can use the next time around. You already have history, you have data supporting your claim. Previous time you had suggested something which was not agreed upon. The next time when you're trying to influence without authority, you can use that as an example and you would be heard, right? So that's about aligning with the organizational needs per se. Product triangle we just went into. Now let's take a look into the history and understand how certain products or features, services rather, were able to outclass. Now, let me use the example of Gmail. So I'm using it as an example for a product. When Gmail came in, Gmail was not an innovative product. It was not something which had this wow factor. It was not the first email application. You had Hotmail, you had other mails, Yahoo, and so on and so forth. But Gmail was able to outclass, and it's now preferred by most of the folks, and it's even used by most corporates, is what I understand. There is still a good amount of corporates which still uses the Microsoft bundle, as I said, because it comes as a bundled product. So why not use Microsoft Outlook when you are paying for the other bundle? That's how they are still surviving. But Gmail still made it big, not because they had this features where they could outclass, but they looked into more on how to innovate and improve an existing product, right? So that should also be our thought process. Now, depending upon what feature or what product you are working on, it also depends on how you look at it. Now, if you have Gmail as a product now, and if there are a lot of features to be developed, if you take a feature which is innovative out of the box and you kind of put it in the first release, when you launch it, more often than not, you wouldn't not have much of visibility if that doesn't work fine. I mean, let's be really honest here. What is preventing us from transforming or taking the step into moving from petrol or diesel cars onto electric, right? We already have a mindset, right? The moment I fill gas, it doesn't give me any problem for 1,000 kilometers or so. So for the next 1,000 kilometers, I don't have a headache because that amount of fuel is definitely going to give me this amount of kilometers, is something which is written in blood. So if you want to move away from petrol or diesel cars and elevate onto electric vehicles, you need to first have this fundamental understanding or trust that EVs can live up to your diesel or petrol cars. Basically, that's also something which Gmail did, right? I mean, they made sure that they're able to compete with the customers, and they made sure when it comes to the needs which were survival and competing, their quality was one of the best. And then slowly but surely, they increased the features which could outlast them, and they didn't stop. They haven't stopped until now, and that's why they are global leaders. So that's an example for you to understand how Gmail was able to do it. I mean, certain times it could happen that the management or the customers have a different approach to it, right? I mean, you could have a customer, you could have a product management professional who said, okay, we already have Rediff, Yahoo, we already know what electronic mails are, we already know what is possible. If we go out with Gmail, I don't think people are going to imbibe it. We might have to develop something new out of the ordinary, and we will have to maybe bring it to the market so that people say, hey, Gmail doesn't just send mails, it also does other stuff. Yes, I mean, that's one of your marketing point, but had Google concentrated about 70% of its release potential to develop something which is out of the ordinary and only 30% onto the ordinary things, and if it had flawed or did not deliver something with quality for the fundamental need of sending an email or sending communicating between two individuals, it would have failed big time. So that's also something where you kind of take a step. This is when you have a product. So I just gave you two kind of examples, a calculator example where you had to aggressively look into features which are outbound, and this might be something different from what your customer says. And now I'm giving you an example of Gmail where they played it safe, where they said, or they did look at features which were already available but gave them rock solid and then kind of improved. Same can be said about the services like Amazon online shopping as well as Uber. If you look at Amazon online shopping, that's a revelation, right? I mean, the retail selling industry was already there, and you already had people delivering to home at certain points, not at a nation level or international level, but at least when it comes to towns or cities. If you buy something, you could have this luxury of getting it delivered to your doorstep. That was still there, but Amazon took this model, revamped it big time, and it started creating a ripple which right now is present across all the continents, right? So this was something where you already had a product, you already had a service, but in order for you to kind of make an impact, you had to align such that the customer needs are mapped. Now, something which is different here is that the customer needs are not controlled by a person who's using it, or the end customer is at the liberty of Amazon, because he just uses what are the feature which is provided by the organization per se. And here's where the control actually shifts, and you have more control in deciding on what feature goes when. And if you look at how Amazon works as a business model, this is where I said that data comes into picture. Influencing without authority and using the data plays a big role on the feature lineup when it comes to the step-by-step flow by which Amazon introduced its new products or feature. So here you have a situation where the end customer particularly did not tell you or per se the organization what are the critical features he or she needs, what are the competing features he or she needs, or what are the features which can outclass. Here again is where you kind of sit down, look at what is being provided, and then you make a decision. So if you look at the other competitors or any other products which were available at that point, they did do something. I mean, delivery was possible. I mean, you could transport an item from point A to point B, but the radius and the amount of products which could be transferred was very minimal at a very high cost, and it involved a lot of time. Now, this is something which Amazon took into consideration, revamped it. It did not change any of the operating procedures. It just worked on the quantifiable numbers. It worked on the price with which you kind of transfer a product from point A to point B, the amount of time it takes for the transfer, and the delivery per se. So it just worked on the fundamentals, but it worked delivering them pretty solid. And now you know where Amazon as an organization is, right? So with the interest of time, let me just skip Uber and Airbnb and just move on to the products per se. I think we talked about Apple iPhones and Tesla cars. I mean, what I wanted to convey over here was basically that Apple iPhones still aren't perfect, right? I mean, let's accept that as a notion. I mean, they're good. It doesn't hang. Nobody can break into them, but they do have their flaws. But what Apple phones do good, they do it great. I mean, they take great pictures. The usability is amazing. If you have an Apple iPhone, it can last ages if you take care. and it also has its own cons. I mean, I would have loved to interact and understand what you feel about it. I mean, when it comes to the pros and cons, but maybe the Q&A, if we get time, we can talk about this in detail. So what they did is that whatever they concentrated it well. They provided good quality, but that didn't stop them. I mean, they did not develop things perfectly from release 1. I mean, the first iteration of Apple iPhones did have their flaws. They had battery issues, but they still came in. They iterated. Second iteration, they looked into providing better usability, better robust operating system. They still had the battery issues. Third iterations, they started looking into battery issues and per se. So basically, when you look at the needs, they kind of rearranged it, right? I mean, initially they started giving a lot of iPhone being the product. They did just a phone wouldn't have survived. So they went in here aggressively. They gave more weightage to needs which were either to outclass or to compete, and the survival needs they kind of kept as minimal. And this is where innovation or entrepreneurial vision comes into picture, right? I mean, right now most of us are iPhone customers, but 10 years down, 10 years ago or 15 years ago, if somebody had asked you to, during a kind of a interview session or a kind of a brainstorming session, what would be a wow factor in a phone, none of us would have had this image or idea on what could actually entice a user to have a better phone, right? I mean, thinking about this and implementing this as a feature is the value add, and it's not a small task which can happen. I mean, with the service, when you have a customer, when you have an organization, you have somebody who actually draws the golden line and tell you what needs to be done. But when it comes to products which you kind of develop for the market or B2C, business to customer, it's more difficult, to be honest. The reason is that most of the impact or how the product makes a difference is felt after the customer starts using it. And understanding this before and deciding on how you kind of decide on the needs is a bit difficult. And this is where a lot of numbers come into picture. Lastly, what I would like to talk about is McDonald's, because they created a revolution when it came to the service industry and the food service industry per se. I mean, we had restaurants, we had food outlets, but we never had McDonald's, right? I mean, nobody could think about in the early 1940s that you could go to a place, you can just hand over a dollar bill and walk away with food. I mean, at that time you had to go there, you had to wait, you had to get your order in queue processed, and then you got your product, right? They made this revelation possible, and they're still holding their ground. So basically here too as well, it was an existing business line which was there, but they still innovated and they were able to develop something which was out of the ordinary. So developing perfect products can be different. I mean, you could develop something which is not there, innovative product, but you can also outclass something. You could, these are real life, real time examples which I've taken. You could always relate it to something which you're working. I mean, if you're working in a financial domain, you have a product where initially you look at a computer, you work on it, right? I mean, you had to visit the bank. The bank had a computer. They had systems which were integrated to servers, and they were performing the actions for you, be it the money transfer and stuff. Then you had a session where you could log into computers, you could do the transactions. Now you're looking at a stage where you can do all these transactions via phone, right? So when you look at this perspective as well, I mean, there is this transition where you're moving from B to C in a very interactive way. I mean, earlier B2C was such that you had an interface, the interface being the bank person who actually does the task for the customer. Then you had actual B2C interaction where the customer used the laptop to perform his action. Now you have the actual B2C where the customer uses the phone to perform the actions. Now, if you look at the thought process, the basic fundamental needs also changed from then and there. Earlier, the need was to make sure that the actual transactions happen, right? I mean, if somebody deposits the money, if the bank teller performs an action in the computer, it should work. So that was needed. But then again, when it became to B2C per se, security started becoming important, making sure there is a robust system started becoming important, making sure that the system doesn't let the user do something which he is not supposed to do, also became one of the most important needs. So depending upon these things, your needs also get modulated. And when it comes to product needs, it's something which you need to kind of envision, or you need to understand from the persona of the people who are using the products. Okay. Ruth, I'm not sure if I can take another 2 minutes because I think the scheduled discussion is already over time by 3 minutes. I just wanted to check.
Yeah, 2 minutes is fine, Piradeesh. Thanks.
Thank you, Ruth. So something which is interesting for the post-COVID situation is the situational needs. I never thought I would talk about it, but I just wanted to talk about it because somebody from a healthcare background told me that I should talk about this. Now, most of you who work with healthcare might know that there are regulations, FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, when it comes to the US, you have a European body. Similarly, you have the administrative bodies everywhere. Now, for you to have a vaccine released onto the market, it's a 5-year process. So there is a lot of testing which is done. You have the initial product which is developed, then you have a lot of testing, then you have all these data which is collated, and then you submit it for approvals. These are done across the globe using a plethora of folks, and they generate this data, they analyze this data, and they deem whether a drug, a medicine, or a vaccination is safe or not. But COVID actually changed it. I mean, it was such that you had a vaccine which was pushed across within a span of less than 18 months. So you had people using the vaccine was designed, tested, and made available to the market within a span of 18 years. Now, what do you say over here? I mean, when you talk about healthcare, regulatory requirements are right up there. Patient safety is right up there. Now, there was a situation where you had to prioritize time and effort, or the money involved was not a point of thought as well. I mean, regulations were not thought about. The amount of money which was invested into this investigation was not thought about, but just getting the product as soon as possible was something which was thought about. Now, that was a revelation in the healthcare industry, because in healthcare industry per se, for people who you might already know, doing this in a very short span of time is something which is unprecedented, and it has never happened. So situational needs is also something which you need to kind of think about and decide. So this is also something which I wanted to bring up. Conflicting needs, just to kind of let you know, you might have conflicting needs when you have multiple stakeholders who are looking for a product. You might have a person or a organization asking for the feature, and you would have somebody who doesn't want it. I mean, this is one of the need which can be negotiated off the table as soon as possible. I mean, you cannot have a sports car which is fast as well as which gives good mileage, right? I mean, it can't happen. So this is something which you can basically make sure it doesn't fit into the entire release cycle if provided. So yeah, I think this is what I wanted to convey. I mean, maybe certain points or certain slides were pretty brief because owing to the time detail, but this is what I wanted to convey to you, everybody. Basically put, when needs do come in, if you ask me, you always have a control over it. You can always segregate them on what has the most impact depending upon your product or your feature which you're providing. You need to percentage them as a survival need, as a need to compete, as a need to outclass, and you actually can negotiate this with the customer and make sure you plan it on a release such that your overall product has a viable impact on the actual customers using it. All right. I think I am done. I will stop sharing, and if there are any questions, I can briefly take them.
Great, thank you, Piradeesh. That was really great, and we've got a couple of people coming on and just thanking you for the session. And yeah, just apologies to everyone for the technical hiccups at the beginning, but we got going nicely and had a great session. So thank you, everyone, for staying on and joining us today. I think there's a couple of questions. Yeah, maybe we'll just get those. I think there's two that I've seen come up. I'll get Sips to go through those or read those out to you, Piradeesh, and maybe you can just get those two. If any more come through, we will then just, we can send those through to you and those can be answered at a later stage. But yeah, I think there's one from Patrick and one from Baring. So yeah, Sips, hand over to you just to get those two questions to Piradeesh. Thanks.
Thanks for an excellent presentation, sir. We have a question from Patrick. A SWOT analysis will be an option that comes to mind to allow companies grade their current products and define the need to compete. What other BA techniques would you recommend to complete this analysis?
People rely a lot on SWOT analysis. That is definitely nice because SWOT analysis helps you to benchmark. As in, if you have a competing product, definitely you can benchmark something, but you could also look at how certain things can be improved. So if you look at a product, as I said, each product has some core values. If it is a financial product, security has the highest core value. If you look at a healthcare product, the amount of data which is collated has the highest value, so on and so forth. So if you can actually add additional value onto the core feature, as well as enhance the existing simpler features, that basically helps, right? I mean, you don't need competition to tell that, hey, you can improve your core functionalities. I mean, if it's a financial product, you don't want Bank A's software to be rigid enough to actually push you to develop something more rigid. So what you can do is that depending upon your product or your organization, you can always take a back step, see where your company has a visibility. So for example, if you take KPMG, they're known for their auditing skills. I mean, if you can strengthen more of their auditing skills by the features which you provide, that's a value add. And if you already know something, some segments which they are not very good at, you could add a feature there. So that's also something which you can look at. I mean, SWOT analysis, definitely, but SWOT analysis just helps you compete with the market. If you want to outclass, then you actually need to align yourself with what your product is supposed to do or what your organization is planning to do. Does this help?
Thanks for explaining, sir. We have a second question from Pareng Letapa. In addressing the organizational need, can you recommend the usage of McKinsey 7S model?
Yes, I would say yes. So McKinsey's 7S model is fine. depending upon, then again, I'm talking about depending upon, because the size of the organization and the end goal of the organization has a kind of impact over here. If you are a very small organization trying to make this multi-million-dollar target, McKinsey 7 model might be more timid for you. You might need to look at something more aggressive. But if you are already a multi-billion-dollar organization and you want to sustain your market as well as then improve, then yes, McKinsey model would be the right way to go. And there is no harm in innovating. I mean, you can always use McKinsey's model as a benchmark, and you could always innovate, or you could try additional mix and match. I mean, what I see as a trend now is that there is this hybrid models where people kind of mix one or more models and they innovate and come up with a quasi model themselves. So yeah, that's the way to go in the near future, is what I believe.
Thank you, sir.
Great, thank you. I think that brings into today's session. Again, just a big thank you to everybody, all the panelists, hosts, facilitators, and especially the people who took time out of their day to attend today. So thank you very much, and just great to collaborate with the IBA Ireland chapter. So we look forward to many more collaborations with the other chapters, and yeah, great to be able to especially collaborate with the Ireland chapter in the same sort of time zone as us. So it's great to have that ability to co-host with them. So yes, thank you everybody, and yeah, we look forward to another session with Ireland chapter.
Bye everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody.